Hey guys, tonight we begin not with a fairy tale or a distant legend, but with something far more powerful and complicated, falling in love in the middle of a revolution. Because believe it or not, finding romance in 1963 Georgia, where every choice was political, every relationship was scrutinized, and trust could mean the difference between freedom and betrayal, was somehow even more intense than any modern dating drama. From freedom songs to accusations that could destroy a life, love in the civil rights era was less about grand gestures and more about courage when everything was on the line. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together, to a place where love and justice became inseparable, and where truth had to fight its way through lies to survive. The summer of 1963 burned hot across Georgia, and nowhere did it burn hotter than at Magnolia Grove College, a jewel of historically black education nestled among ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss. The campus had stood for nearly a century, its red brick buildings a testament to perseverance, its manicured lawns a carefully maintained face of dignity in a world that questioned whether dignity could exist in black skin. Dean Leonato Washington had built Magnolia Grove into something more than a college. It was a sanctuary, a proving ground, a place where young minds sharpened themselves for the battles ahead. His modest white house sat at the edge of campus, its wraparound porch always open to students, faculty, and friends. The house smelled of his niece Beatrice's coffee and his daughter Hero's fresh flowers, a combination that somehow represented everything good about the place. On this particular August morning, the magnolia trees stood perfectly still in the thick, humid air. Beatrice Washington stood on that porch, her natural hair pulled back with a bright yellow headband, her slim frame draped in a simple cotton dress that fell just below her knees. She held a copy of The Souls of Black Folk in one hand and a cigarette in the other, though she wasn't really reading. Her dark eyes scanned the long driveway that wound through the campus gates. "They're not coming any faster just because you're staring," called Hero from inside the screen door. Where Beatrice burned with a restless energy, Hero moved through the world like water, quiet, reflective, necessary. She wore her hair pressed and curled, her pale blue dress immaculate despite the heat. She was arranging fresh-cut roses in a crystal vase, each stem placed with mathematical precision. "I'm not staring for them," Beatrice shot back, though they both knew it was a lie. "I'm watching to make sure the Montgomery police didn't follow them across state lines." It had been 3 months since Don Pedro Freeman and his group had left for the Freedom Rides. 3 months of newspaper photographs showing buses burning, activists being beaten, young people dragged from lunch counters. 3 months of Beatrice organizing support from the campus, raising bail money, coordinating with SNCC and CORE, while Hero typed letters and made phone calls with quiet efficiency. And 3 months since Beatrice had last traded barbs with Benedick Porter, Don Pedro's second-in-command, the cynical ex-journalist who'd walked away from a career at a northern paper to teach history at Magnolia Grove and occasionally risk his life for freedom. "You know Benedick will have some smart comment the moment he sees you," Hero said, joining her cousin on the porch. "Something about how you've probably been too comfortable here while they were in jail cells. And I'll remind him that organizing 50 college students and keeping them from getting expelled takes more courage than getting your head cracked by a police baton, which at least has the benefit of making the newspapers feel sorry for you." Hero smiled softly. She knew the dance between Beatrice and Benedick as well as anyone. They'd been circling each other for 2 years, ever since Benedick had arrived at Magnolia Grove with his horn-rimmed glasses, his worn leather satchel, and his conviction that believing in anything wholeheartedly was a weakness. Beatrice had taken one look at his detached superiority and declared war. A car horn echoed across campus, long and celebratory. Then another. Then the sound of singing, freedom songs carried on the wind. "They're here," Hero whispered. Within minutes, a caravan of 3 cars rolled up the long driveway. The lead vehicle was Don Pedro's prized 1959 Cadillac Coupe de Ville, sky blue and somehow still gleaming despite 3 months of southern back roads. Behind it came a beaten Ford truck and a Volkswagen bus painted with peace symbols. Students poured out of dormitories, faculty emerged from buildings, and suddenly the quiet campus exploded with noise, cheering, crying, singing. Don Pedro stepped out first, tall and broad-shouldered. He wore a dark suit despite the heat. His tie loosened just enough to suggest he'd been wearing it for days. His face showed new lines, and a healing cut traced his left cheekbone, but his smile was incandescent. This was a man who'd stared down fire hoses and dogs and found himself still standing. "Leonato," he called out, his voice a smooth baritone that carried. "It's good to be somewhere the police aren't waiting with chains." Dean Washington descended the porch steps with his arms wide. He was a compact man in his 50s, his hair going silver at the temples, his three-piece suit somehow unwrinkled despite the heat. The two men embraced like brothers, which in every way that mattered they were. From the passenger side of the Cadillac emerged Claudio Chen, and the side of him stopped Hero mid-step. Claudio was 22, Chinese-American, slender and serious, with dark hair that fell across his forehead. He'd been a graduate student in philosophy before Don Pedro had recruited him to the cause. The son of immigrants, he'd found in the civil rights movement a crucible where idealism could be tested against reality. He wore simple clothes, dark slacks and a white shirt rolled to his elbows, and when his eyes found Hero's across the crowd, something passed between them that made Beatrice smile knowingly. Then Benedick unfolded himself from the back seat, and Beatrice's smile sharpened into something more combative. He looked terrible, which she hated to admit gave him a certain romantic appeal. His usually neat fade had grown out, his goatee was uneven, and his clothes, dark jeans and a button-down shirt that might have been white a week ago, hung on a frame that had lost weight. But his eyes behind those thick-framed glasses were as sharp as ever, dark and intelligent and maddeningly self-assured. "Well," Benedick said loud enough for the whole porch to hear, "I see the campus is still standing. I was certain that without me here to provide intellectual ballast, Beatrice would have led everyone into some reckless crusade that ended with federal troops on the lawn." "Benedick Porter," Beatrice called back, descending the steps with her head high. 3 months on the road, and you come back more insufferable than ever. I suppose getting beaten by racists has convinced you that you're brave, when really you're just too stubborn to have the sense God gave a mule." The watching crowd laughed, and Benedick's face broke into something close to genuine joy. "I've missed you too, Beatrice," Benedick said, adjusting his glasses in that particular way he had when he was preparing to deliver what he considered a devastating observation. "Though I see you're still smoking those mentholated cigarettes, which explains why your arguments have no substance. Just a pleasant minty flavor that dissipates the moment anyone examines them closely. And I see you're still wearing those glasses that make you look like you're perpetually surprised by the discovery that other people have thoughts," Beatrice countered, flicking ash from her cigarette. "Tell me, did the Montgomery police mistake you for someone important? Or did they beat you simply because your face naturally inspires violence?" Don Pedro laughed, a deep, genuine sound. "Lord, I'd forgotten how much I missed this. 3 months of life-or-death situations, and the moment we're back, these two are at each other's throats like it's an Olympic sport." Dean Washington gestured everyone toward the house. Come, we have food prepared, real food, not whatever you've been eating from gas stations that would serve you. Hero has been cooking since dawn." The group moved inside, trailing into the spacious parlor where Hero had indeed prepared a feast. Fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread, sweet potato pie, the kind of meal that said welcome home in a language deeper than words. The coffee table and dining table were both laden, and the smell alone made several of the returned activists stop in their tracks. Claudio found himself standing near Hero in the kitchen doorway. Up close, she was even more beautiful than he'd remembered from their brief meeting 3 months ago, before the rides had begun. Her eyes were the color of warm honey, and there was something in the careful way she moved that suggested depths he wanted to explore. "Miss Washington," he said quietly, his voice carrying just a trace of his parents' Cantonese accent. "The food looks wonderful." "Hero, please," she said, and her voice was soft as evening rain. "We're not formal here, not with friends. And you're a friend, Mr. Chen, after what you've done." "Claudio," he insisted, "and I didn't do anything special. Just what needed doing." "That's what makes it special," Hero said, meeting his eyes for just a moment before looking away, her hands smoothing an already smooth tablecloth. Across the room, Beatrice watched this exchange with the satisfied air of someone watching a play unfold exactly as expected, but her attention was pulled away by Benedick, who had positioned himself near the bookshelf, studying her uncle's collection with an appraising eye. "I see Leonato finally got a copy of The Fire Next Time," Benedick said, "though I imagine you've already read it and formed 17 different opinions, each more militant than the last." "I've read it 3 times, Beatrice said, moving to stand beside him, close enough that she could smell road dust and cheap motel soap. "And my opinions aren't militant, they're realistic. But I wouldn't expect you to understand the difference, since you've made a career out of observing life from a safe distance and calling it wisdom." "A safe distance," Benedick repeated, and something flickered behind his eyes. "Yes, spending 3 months getting arrested, beaten, and sleeping in cells with rats was tremendously safe. I felt positively coddled." For just a moment, Beatrice's armor cracked. "I'm glad you're back safe," she said so quietly that only he could hear. Then louder, "Someone needs to be here to serve as a bad example to the students." Before Benedick could respond, the front door opened again, and the atmosphere in the room shifted like clouds covering the sun. Don John Freeman entered, and he entered alone. He was Don Pedro's half-brother, a fact that their father, a prominent Atlanta minister, had kept quiet for the first 15 years of John's life. Where Pedro was broad and open, John was lean and closed. Where Pedro wore his suit with pride, John wore work clothes, denim and worn cotton, like a deliberate rejection of respectability politics. His face was harder than his brother's, marked by a scar that ran from his ear to his jaw, courtesy of a police baton in Birmingham. "John," Dean Washington said, his welcome warm but noticeably more careful. "Come in, son, there's plenty of food." "I'm not hungry," John said. But he came in anyway, his eyes scanning the room with the alertness of someone who'd learned never to feel entirely safe. His gaze lingered on his brother, and something bitter passed across his face. Don Pedro saw it. He always saw it. "John organized the safe houses in Montgomery," he told the room. "Without him, half of us would still be in jail." "Without me, you wouldn't have gone at all," John muttered, but he accepted the glass of sweet tea that Hero offered him, his "thank you" grudging but genuine. John's companion Baraccio slouched in behind him. Baraccio was a thin, nervous man with quick eyes and quicker hands, the kind of person who always seemed to be calculating odds. He'd grown up with John in Atlanta's poorer neighborhoods, and his loyalty to John was absolute, though its foundation was unclear. Friendship, dependence, or something darker. "Baraccio," Don Pedro acknowledged with a nod that was cordial but not warm. "Pedro," Baraccio replied, helping himself to cornbread without waiting for an invitation. The room settled into the rhythms of reunion. Stories were told, some heroic, some terrifying, some darkly funny in the way that trauma becomes funny when you survive it. Claudio described organizing students at Alabama State. Benedick recounted getting arrested for disturbing the peace by sitting in a whites-only waiting room and reading Aristotle. Don Pedro talked about the children who'd lined the streets of Montgomery, singing freedom songs while adults threw bottles. Hero listened with her whole body, leaning forward, her hands clasped. Claudio found himself telling stories for her benefit, watching her face as she reacted. And when their eyes met across the room, something unspoken but powerful passed between them. Beatrice noticed. She noticed everything. And when she caught Benedick watching her with an unreadable expression, she raised an eyebrow in challenge. "What are you staring at, Professor Porter?" "I'm trying to determine if you've gotten more insufferable in my absence, or if I'd simply forgotten the precise degree of your insufferability and am now experiencing it fresh. The word you're looking for is impressive," Beatrice said. "I've become more impressive, though I understand why you'd confuse the two, since you find any woman with opinions to be inherently threatening to your delicate masculine ego." Don Pedro, overhearing, laughed so hard he had to set down his glass. "God help me, I have missed this house." As evening approached and the sky turned the purple pink of a Georgia sunset, Dean Washington stood and raised his glass. The room fell quiet. "To those who went," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "and to those who waited, to the work done and the work still to come, to freedom, however long the road, to freedom," everyone echoed, and the words hung in the air like a prayer, like a promise, like a challenge to the world outside these walls. Later that evening, after the meal had been cleared and the crowd had thinned to just the core group, Don Pedro stood on the porch with Leonato, watching students walk across the lamplit campus. Fireflies danced between the magnolia trees, and somewhere in the distance someone was playing Coltrane on a phonograph. "The college looks the same," Don Pedro said, "but everything feels different, like we've crossed some line we can't uncross." Leonato nodded slowly, lighting his pipe. "The students are restless. After Birmingham, after the March on Washington, they want to act. I spend half my time convincing them not to get themselves killed, and the other half wondering if I'm wrong to hold them back." "You're not wrong," Don Pedro said, "but you're not right either. That's the hell of it." Inside, Claudio had gathered the courage to speak to Hero privately. She was washing dishes at the kitchen sink, her hands moving through soapy water with methodical grace. Through the window above the sink, she could see the campus lights reflected in the small pond behind the house. "Let me help," Claudio said, picking up a dish towel. "You're a guest," Hero protested, but he was already beside her, drying a plate with careful attention. "When I was on the bus to Montgomery," Claudio said, his voice quiet enough that only she could hear, "when they stopped us at the state line and the mob was forming, I thought about a lot of things. Mostly I thought about whether I'd done anything that mattered, whether I'd lived at all, really lived." Hero's hands stilled in the water. "You were brave." "No," Claudio said. "I was terrified every single moment. But I kept thinking, if I could just get back here, if I could just see you again, then at least I'd know what I was being brave for." Hero turned to look at him, water dripping from her fingers. In the warm kitchen light, her face was open, vulnerable. "You thought about me?" "Every day," Claudio admitted. Is that foolish?" "We only met once before I left." "Once was enough," Hero said softly, and when she smiled it was like sunrise. In the parlor, Benedick had positioned himself in Leonato's favorite armchair with a glass of bourbon, watching Beatrice argue with Don Pedro about strategy for the fall semester. She wanted to organize a march to the state capital. Don Pedro was counseling patience. Neither was yielding ground. "You're both wrong," Benedick interjected, swirling his bourbon. "A march now would be crushed, and patience is just another word for cowardice. What you need is theater, something that makes the papers without making martyrs." Beatrice turned on him. "And what would you know about it, having spent the last 3 months getting arrested for sitting in the wrong chair? Real strategic genius on display there." "Getting arrested was the point," Benedick said calmly. "Every photograph in every newspaper, every northern liberal clutching their pearls, that's worth more than 1,000 angry speeches to people who already agree with you. So we should perform for white approval, dance for their cameras. We should use every weapon we have," Benedick said, and his voice had steel in it now. "Your pride is a luxury, Beatrice. People are dying." The room went silent. Beatrice's face tightened, and for a moment everyone thought she might slap him. Instead, she stubbed out her cigarette with precise violence. "You're right," she said, each word clipped. "People are dying, which is why we can't afford to waste time on half measures and philosophical debates from men who think wisdom means never committing to anything." She walked out onto the porch, letting the screen door slam behind her. Don Pedro raised an eyebrow at Benedick. "That went well." "She hates when I'm right," Benedick said, but he was staring at the door she'd exited through. "She doesn't hate you at all," Don Pedro observed. "That's what worries you." Benedick opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it again. He drained his bourbon instead. On the porch, Beatrice found her uncle and Don Pedro's conversation winding down. She stood at the railing, gripping it hard enough that her knuckles paled. "He makes me so angry," she said to no one in particular. "Benedick?" her uncle asked mildly. "Or yourself?" Beatrice didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because the truth was complicated. That Benedick's detachment infuriated her precisely because she saw through it, saw the passion he was so desperate to hide behind irony and intellect, and seeing it made her want to crack that armor open, to make him feel something undeniable. Inside, Claudio emerged from the kitchen with Hero, both of them wearing matching expressions of quiet joy. Don Pedro saw them and smiled knowingly. Young Claudio has found something worth fighting for, he murmured to John, who'd been sitting silently in the corner, watching everything with hooded eyes. "Foolish," John said flatly. "Love makes you weak, makes you compromise. He'll regret it." "Not everyone sees love as a trap, brother," Don Pedro said gently. John's jaw tightened. "No. Some people see it as a weapon, and they're usually right." The evening wound down with promises of breakfast, of meetings to plan the fall semester, of rest for those who'd earned it. As the group dispersed into the warm Georgia night, Claudio caught Hero's hand for just a moment at the door. "May I see you tomorrow?" he asked. "I'd like that," Hero said, and the simplicity of it, the pure, uncomplicated truth, made Claudio feel like he was floating. From the shadows of the porch, John watched them with narrowed eyes. Beside him, Baracchio watched John. "Trouble?" Baracchio asked quietly. "Always," John replied, and his smile was thin and cold as a knife. The next morning arrived with the kind of heat that made the air shimmer above the asphalt. Sunday morning at Magnolia Grove meant church bells echoing across campus from the small chapel at the center of the grounds, their bronze voices calling the faithful to worship. But before the bells rang, before the students pressed their Sunday clothes and the faculty gathered their Bibles, there was a quieter ritual taking place in Dean Washington's kitchen. Beatrice stood at the stove making coffee in the percolator, still in her nightgown and robe, her natural hair loose around her shoulders. She'd barely slept, her mind turning over Benedick's words from the night before, the infuriating truth in them, the way he'd looked at her when he said, "People are dying," like it was an accusation meant specifically for her. The screen door creaked, and she turned to find Benedick himself standing there in the gray dawn light, wearing the same clothes from yesterday, his glasses slightly askew. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "The door was unlocked," he said, which wasn't an apology or an explanation, just a statement of fact. "Everything's unlocked here," Beatrice replied, turning back to the coffee. "We're not afraid." "You should be," Benedick said, stepping inside. "After Birmingham, after everything, keeping your doors unlocked is just inviting trouble." "Is that why you're here? To lecture me about door locks at dawn?" Benedick was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost its sharp edge. "I came to apologize. What I said last night about your pride being a luxury, that was unfair. You've done more here, organizing, keeping these students focused and safe, than most people do in a lifetime." Beatrice's hands paused in their work. She didn't turn around. "Are you feeling well? Should I call a doctor?" Benedick Porter apologizing. "This might be a sign of heat stroke." "I'm trying to be sincere," Benedick said, and there was something raw in his voice that made Beatrice finally turn to face him. "I'm not good at it. Sincerity. It feels like walking around without skin." They stood there in the kitchen as the coffee percolated, the sound filling the silence between them. In that moment, Beatrice saw past the armor of irony and intellect to something underneath. Loneliness, maybe, or fear of the loneliness that comes from never letting anyone close enough to hurt you. "I accept your apology," she said finally, "even though you're right that I don't know how to take it." "We're a pair, aren't we?" Benedick said with a sad smile. "Two people so afraid of being foolish that we've made a religion out of being clever." "Speak for yourself," Beatrice said, but her voice was gentle. "I'm not afraid of being foolish. I'm afraid of being ordinary, of accepting what the world says I should want. A husband, children, a small life. There's a war being fought for our souls, Benedick. and I refuse to sit it out just because I'm supposed to be someone's wife. No one could make you ordinary, Benedick said quietly. You're the most extraordinary person I've ever met, and that terrifies me. Before Beatrice could respond, footsteps sounded on the stairs, and the moment shattered. Hero appeared in her church dress, pale yellow with white gloves, her hair perfectly curled. She stopped short, seeing Benedick. Professor Porter, she said, surprised. I didn't know we had an early visitor. I was just leaving, Benedick said, and he was already at the door, the walls back up, the armor restored. Tell your father I'll see him at the afternoon meeting. He was gone before Beatrice could say another word. Hero moved to her cousin's side, looking out at Benedick's retreating figure crossing the dewy lawn. What was that about? I have no idea, Beatrice said, and it was mostly true. She understood the words, but the feeling underneath them, that was uncharted territory. By midday, after church services had concluded and Sunday dinner had been served and cleared, Don Pedro gathered a small group in Leonato's study. The room smelled of pipe tobacco and old books, sunlight slanting through Venetian blinds to stripe everything in light and shadow. Claudio sat forward in his chair, his hands clasped between his knees, his face serious. I want to marry her, Claudio said without preamble. I know it's fast. I know we've only really known each other for a day, but I've never been more certain of anything. Don Pedro leaned against the desk, his arms crossed, studying the young man. You were certain about going to Montgomery. That certainty nearly got you killed. This is different, Claudio insisted. When I'm with Hero, everything makes sense. The work we're doing, the risks we're taking, it all has a point when I think about building a life with her. Leonato, sitting in his leather chair with his pipe, considered this carefully. Hero is my daughter, my treasure. I've raised her to think for herself, to be more than just someone's wife. If you're asking for my blessing, I need to know you see that in her. Not just a pretty face, not just someone to come home to, but a partner. I see everything, Claudio said earnestly. Her intelligence, her strength, the way she moves through the world, making it better just by being in it. I don't want to diminish her, sir. I want to build something with her. Don Pedro smiled. Then let me help you court her properly. These are complicated times, and rushing into marriage, it might raise questions, cause talk. Let's do this right. A proper courtship, public and respectable, so that when you two do marry, it's a celebration, not a scandal. I can court her myself, Claudio protested. Of course you can, Don Pedro agreed. But I'm a better talker, and I know Leonato better. Let me smooth the path, vouch for your character, help Hero see what I already know, that you're a good man with an honest heart. Benedick, who'd been standing by the window watching the campus, turned and raised an eyebrow. You're going to woo the girl on his behalf? That seems like a recipe for disaster. What if she falls for you instead? Hero knows her own mind, Leonato said firmly, and I trust Don Pedro's intentions. It's not his intentions I'm worried about, Benedick said. It's the general principle. Love should be direct, unmediated. All these games and strategies, they miss the point entirely. And what would you know about love? Don Pedro asked with amusement. You've made a career out of avoiding it. Exactly, Benedick said, which makes me an expert observer. I've watched countless friends make fools of themselves, surrender their freedom, chain themselves to another person and call it happiness. Marriage is a trap, and love is the bait. Then you'll die alone, Claudio said, not unkindly. And bitter. I'll die free, Benedick corrected. There's a difference. Don Pedro shook his head. One day, some woman is going to crack that shell of yours, and when she does, I'm going to throw the biggest party this campus has ever seen. I'd sooner see the clan at a SNCC meeting, Benedick replied. But there was something hollow in his bravado, something that made everyone in the room smile knowingly. That evening, as the sun dipped below the pine trees and painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Hero sat on the front porch swing, pretending to read a book she'd already read twice. She was waiting, though she'd never admit it aloud. When Claudio appeared on the path from the men's dormitory, her heart performed a small rebellion against her carefully maintained composure. But it wasn't Claudio who approached first. It was Don Pedro, walking with the confident stride of a man who'd talked his way out of jail cells and into the hearts of skeptical sheriffs. "Miss Hero," Don Pedro said, removing his hat. "Might I have a word?" Hero set down her book, confused but gracious. "Of course, Mr. Freeman." Don Pedro settled into the wicker chair across from her, and behind him, partially hidden by the honeysuckle vine, Claudio watched with nervous anticipation. "I've come to speak to you about a young man," Don Pedro began, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "A young man of exceptional character, brave beyond his years, thoughtful, kind. A man who's risked everything for what he believes in." Hero's pulse quickened. "Go on." "This young man has confided in me that he's developed feelings for someone. Deep feelings. The kind that keep a man awake at night, that make him want to be better than he is. And this someone is you, Hero Washington." Hero's hands clasped the book tighter. "Are you speaking for yourself, Mr. Freeman?" Don Pedro laughed, warm and genuine. "Lord, no. I'm speaking for Claudio Chen, who's standing behind that honeysuckle vine trying not to look like he's eavesdropping on his own courtship." Claudio emerged, sheepish, his face flushed with embarrassment. "I told him I could speak for myself." "You could," Don Pedro agreed, standing. "But I wanted to make sure Hero knew exactly what kind of man was courting her. The kind who'd rather face Bull Connor's fire hoses than risk saying the wrong thing to the woman he loves." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving them alone in the gathering dusk. Hero looked at Claudio, and in the fading light his face was open, vulnerable, everything she'd hoped to see. "Did you really ask him to speak for you?" "No," Claudio said, moving closer. "I asked him to help me court you properly. He took some creative liberties. Hero, I know I should wait, follow all the proper steps. But the truth is, when you've seen what I've seen, when you've been that close to dying, you realize that waiting for the perfect moment is just another way of being afraid." "I'm not asking you to wait," Hero said softly. "I'm only asking you to be honest with me. Always." "I will be," Claudio promised. And when he took her hand, it felt like a covenant. Inside the house, Beatrice had been watching through the window, and when she saw Claudio and Hero's hands joined, she smiled despite herself. But the smile faded when she heard voices in her uncle's study, Don Pedro and Leonato plotting something with the enthusiasm of generals planning a campaign. She pressed her ear to the door, shameless in her curiosity. "Benedick is miserable," Don Pedro was saying. "Anyone with eyes can see it. And Beatrice is no better. They're perfect for each other, but they're both too stubborn to admit it." "So what do you propose?" Leonato asked, amused. "We make them admit it. We let Benedick overhear us discussing Beatrice's secret love for him. We let Beatrice discover that Benedick is pining away for her. Their pride won't let them appear foolish by denying what everyone else supposedly knows." Leonato chuckled. "That's either brilliant or catastrophically misguided." "Often the same thing," Don Pedro said. "But I've seen the way they look at each other when they think no one's watching. They're already in love. They just need permission to stop fighting it." Beatrice pulled away from the door, her heart racing with something between anger and fear, and something else she couldn't name. The idea that Benedick might love her, that others could see what she'd barely admitted to herself. It was exposing in a way that made her want to run. But she was Beatrice Washington. She didn't run. Across campus, in the small apartment above the campus bookstore where Benedick lived among towers of books and stacks of ungraded papers, the man himself sat at his typewriter, trying to work on an article about the Freedom Rides for a northern magazine. But every sentence came out wrong. Every word felt inadequate. The truth was simpler and more terrifying than anything he could type. He was in love with Beatrice Washington, and it was destroying his carefully constructed philosophy of detachment. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Don Pedro entered without waiting for an answer, carrying 2 bottles of Coca-Cola beaded with condensation. "You look like hell," Don Pedro observed, handing him a bottle. "I feel like philosophy," Benedick replied, abstract and ultimately useless. "This about Beatrice?" Benedick's silence was answer enough. Don Pedro settled into the worn armchair, studying his friend. "You know what your problem is. You think feeling something deeply makes you weak. But watching you fight what you feel, that's the weakest thing I've ever seen. I'm not afraid of feeling," Benedick protested. "I'm afraid of becoming one of those men who loses himself in a woman, who sacrifices his principles and his independence for the illusion of connection. Is that what you think love is?" Don Pedro asked gently. "An illusion?" Benedick didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because the truth was he didn't know. He'd spent so long defending himself against love that he'd never actually examined what it might be. "She challenges you," Don Pedro continued. "She makes you think, makes you fight, makes you better. That's not weakness, brother. That's the whole point." After Don Pedro left, Benedick sat in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the campus at night. Students laughing, someone playing guitar, the distant rumble of thunder, promising rain. And for the first time in years, he let himself imagine a different life, one where he wasn't alone, one where Beatrice's sharp wit greeted him every morning, where her courage challenged him to be braver, where her love, if such a thing were possible, might be the adventure he'd been running from his whole life. The following afternoon, Monday, the campus hummed with the resumption of summer classes. The heat pressed down like a physical weight, making the air thick and hard to breathe. Benedick walked across the quad toward the library, his leather satchel heavy with books, his mind still tangled in thoughts of Beatrice. He didn't notice Don Pedro, Leonato, and Claudio arranging themselves near the fountain in the center of the quad, speaking just loudly enough to be overheard, positioned perfectly so that Benedick's path would take him behind the large magnolia tree, close enough to hear every word. Benedick settled onto the bench behind the tree, grateful for the shade, and opened his copy of Letter from Birmingham Jail that he was teaching that week. But the voices carried clearly through the heavy air. "I'm telling you, it's heartbreaking to watch," Don Pedro was saying. "Beatrice Washington, the strongest woman I know, reduced to sighing over Benedick Porter like a schoolgirl." Benedick's head snapped up, the book forgotten. "Hero confirmed it," Leonato added, his voice grave. "Beatrice stays up all night writing his name in her journal, then scratching it out. She's too proud to admit it, but she's deeply, desperately in love with him." "It's tragic," Claudio chimed in. She told Hero she'd rather die than confess her feelings. Knowing how Benedick scorns all romance, she's convinced he'd mock her. Benedick sat frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Should someone tell him?" Claudio asked. "Absolutely not," Don Pedro said firmly. Benedick would turn it into a joke, wound her pride beyond repair. No, better she suffers in silence than suffers his ridicule. The man has no capacity for genuine feeling. "Perhaps we're wrong about that," Leonato said thoughtfully. "Perhaps underneath all that cynicism there's a good man who's simply afraid." "If there is, he hides it well," Don Pedro replied. "Come, let's go. There's nothing to be done for poor Beatrice." Their footsteps faded, and Benedick sat motionless in the shade, his mind reeling. Beatrice. Proud, fierce, brilliant Beatrice in love with him. It seemed impossible. And yet hadn't he noticed something in her eyes lately? Hadn't their arguments felt different, charged with something beyond mere debate? He stood abruptly, pacing behind the tree. If it were true, if she truly loved him, then his own carefully guarded feelings suddenly had a purpose, a direction. He wouldn't mock her. God, he'd rather cut out his own tongue. But could he be what she needed? Could he love her the way she deserved, without reservation, without his armor of irony? "I must be worthy of her," he said aloud to the empty air. "I must change. I must become the kind of man she could love without shame." Inside the library, in the quiet reading room that smelled of old paper and lemon polish, Hero and Beatrice sat at a table supposedly working on organizing files for the NLACP youth chapter. But Hero was distracted, glancing repeatedly at the door. "Are you expecting someone?" Beatrice asked, not looking up from her papers. "Just wondering when Margaret and Ursula will arrive," Hero said. "They were supposed to help us." As if summoned, the two young women entered. Margaret, a senior with a sharp tongue and sharper mind, and Ursula, gentler but no less intelligent. They carried books but set them down quickly, launching into conversation at a volume just slightly too loud for a library. "Did you hear about Professor Porter?" Margaret said. her voice carrying. Poor man. Beatrice's pen stopped moving. What about him? Ursula asked, playing her part. Hero told me in confidence, but since you're here, he's apparently suffering from unrequited love. For Beatrice Washington, of all people. Beatrice's hand clenched around her pen. Hero kept her eyes on her papers, her voice carefully neutral. Margaret, that was told in confidence. I know, but it's just so sad. The man who mocked love for years, finally brought low by it. And for a woman who's made clear she'd rather organize protests than entertain romance. She's not heartless, Ursula defended. But can you imagine Beatrice settling down? She's too wild, too independent. She'd make any man miserable. That's what makes it tragic, Margaret continued. Professor Porter sees past all that. He sees her brilliance, her courage. He told Don Pedro that Beatrice is the only woman in the world who could match him intellectually. But he knows she'd laugh in his face if he confessed. Then he's wise to keep silent, Hero said softly. Better to preserve his dignity. Is dignity worth loneliness? Ursula wondered. Is pride worth dying alone? The question hung in the air like incense, and Beatrice sat perfectly still, her mind racing. Benedick loved her. The idea was absurd, and yet it explained so much, the intensity of their arguments, the way he sought her out, the vulnerability she'd glimpsed in the kitchen at dawn. The other women gathered their things and left, still talking, and Beatrice remained motionless until Hero finally looked up. Are you all right, cousin? Why wouldn't I be? Beatrice said, but her voice lacked its usual certainty. No reason, Hero said innocently. I just thought if someone you respected, someone you argued with constantly, turned out to harbor deeper feelings, it might change how you saw things. Beatrice stood abruptly scattering papers. I need air. She walked out into the brutal afternoon heat, her thoughts a storm. If Benedick truly loved her, if his cynicism was merely armor like her own, then everything she'd believed about remaining free and independent suddenly seemed less like strength and more like cowardice. Could she love him? Could she lower her defenses enough to try? Across campus, in the dim apartment over the bookstore, John Freeman sat with Borachio, a bottle of cheap whiskey between them. John's face was dark with thoughts that had nothing to do with civil rights or justice. Claudio and Hero, he said, the names bitter on his tongue. Another perfect romance. Another example of my brother's golden touch. You could be happy for them, Borachio offered half-heartedly. Happy? John laughed without humor. Why should I be happy? Pedro gets everything. Our father's name, respect, authority. And now he's playing matchmaker, spreading joy like he spreads his political connections. Meanwhile, I get the scraps. So what do you want to do about it? John poured another drink, his scarred face twisted in thought. I want to ruin it. I want Pedro to fail at something. I want that perfect romance to crumble, and I want everyone to see that his judgment isn't infallible. That's dangerous talk, Borachio said quietly. Hero's innocent. Claudio's a good man. Good men, John spat. The world is full of good men who get everything while the rest of us scrabble in the dirt. No, I'm going to plant a seed of doubt. I'm going to make Claudio question Hero's virtue. And when the engagement falls apart, when Pedro's matchmaking blows up in his face, maybe then people will see him as human instead of saintly. Borachio shifted uncomfortably. How? John smiled, cold and calculating. That's where you come in, old friend. That's where you come in. The week that followed moved with the strange momentum of summer in the south, slow and thick as molasses, yet somehow racing towards something inevitable. The campus transformed as word spread that Claudio Chen and Hero Washington were officially courting, with Dean Leonato's blessing and Don Pedro's enthusiastic endorsement. It was the kind of news that gave people hope, a bright spot against the backdrop of continued violence across the region. On Wednesday evening, Dean Leonato announced a party for Friday night, a celebration of the returned activists, and though he was too diplomatic to say it outright, a formal recognition of Claudio and Hero's courtship. The announcement sent the women of the campus into a flurry of dressmaking and hair appointments, while the men debated whether this was purely social or if there were political implications to such public joy in troubled times. Beatrice had been different since the library conversation. The change was subtle. She still argued, still smoked on the porch, still organized the student activists with military precision, but something in her had softened. When Benedick appeared at dinner that Wednesday, she didn't immediately attack. Instead, she watched him with something like curiosity, as if seeing him for the first time. Benedick, for his part, had become almost unrecognizable. He'd shaved carefully, trimmed his hair, and shown up to teach his classes in pressed shirts instead of his usual rumpled academic casualness. More striking was his demeanor. The sharp edges of his wit had rounded, his cynicism replaced by something gentler. "Professor Porter," one of his students had remarked, "you seem different. Did something happen on the Freedom Rides?" "Something happened," Benedick had replied, gazing out the window toward the library where Beatrice was visible through the glass. "I realized that cynicism is easy. Hope is what takes courage." Thursday afternoon found Beatrice helping Hero select a dress for the party. Hero's room was a study in contrasts, neat as a pin but with small rebellions hidden in drawers, pamphlets from SNCC, photographs from protests, a copy of The Feminine Mystique tucked under her Bible. The two cousins sat surrounded by fabric, Hero in her slip, Beatrice smoking by the open window. "The blue one," Beatrice said, pointing with her cigarette. "It brings out your eyes, and Claudio won't be able to form complete sentences." Hero blushed, holding the dress against herself. "Do you think we're moving too fast?" "Fast?" Beatrice laughed. "Cousin, every day we wake up in this world is borrowed time. If you love him, if he loves you, then speed is relative." "That's almost romantic coming from you," Hero observed. "Have you been replaced by a pod person?" Beatrice stubbed out her cigarette with more force than necessary. "I'm capable of recognizing love when I see it. Just because I choose independence doesn't mean I'm blind." "Is it really choice?" Hero asked gently. "Or is it fear?" The question hung between them. Beatrice wanted to deflect, to armor herself in wit, but something stopped her. What if it's both? What if I choose independence because I'm afraid that love means losing myself? "With the wrong person, maybe," Hero said. "But with the right person, love means finding yourself." "And how do you know if someone is the right person?" Hero smiled, folding the blue dress carefully. "When being with them feels like being more yourself than you've ever been. When their presence doesn't diminish you, but amplifies you." Beatrice thought of Benedick, of their arguments that felt like dancing, of the way his mind worked in rhythms that matched her own. "That's terrifying," she admitted. "Yes," Hero agreed. "It is." That evening, Benedick found himself in Don Pedro's rooms in the faculty housing, ostensibly discussing plans for fall semester organizing, but actually seeking advice he couldn't quite bring himself to ask for directly. "You're in love with her," Don Pedro said, pouring them both bourbon. "It's written all over your face. Is it that obvious?" "Only to everyone who's ever met you," Don Pedro said with amusement. "The great Benedick Porter, undone by Beatrice Washington. I never thought I'd see the day." "I don't know how to do this," Benedick admitted, accepting the glass. "I've spent years perfecting detachment. I don't know how to be vulnerable without feeling like I'm walking into traffic." "You do it badly at first," Don Pedro said. "You stumble, you say the wrong things, you feel exposed. And then if you're lucky and she's patient, you learn, you get better at it. What if I'm not good enough for her?" "You're probably not," Don Pedro said cheerfully. "But neither is anyone else because Beatrice is extraordinary. The question isn't whether you're good enough. It's whether you're brave enough to try anyway." Benedick stared into his bourbon, seeing his reflection distorted in the amber liquid. "When did you become so wise about love?" "I'm not wise about it," Don Pedro admitted. "I'm wise about courage. And love takes more courage than facing down Bull Connor's police ever did." Across campus, in the small apartment behind the maintenance shed where John Freeman lived, because he refused Pedro's offer of better accommodations, a different kind of planning was taking place. John sat at a scarred wooden table with Borachio, a notebook between them, sketching out a scheme that grew more elaborate with each passing hour. "Conrad works maintenance," John was saying. He has keys to every building on campus. Hero tutors students in the library every Thursday night until 9. This Thursday, tomorrow, Claudio and Pedro are supposed to be in Atlanta meeting with SCLC leadership. They won't be back until late. I still don't see how this works, Baracchio said nervously. You want me to what? Pretend to be meeting Hero? Not pretend. Actually meet someone in Hero's study room. Margaret, the girl who works in the dean's office. She's ambitious, she wants attention, and she's exactly Hero's height and build. In the dark, from a distance, Conrad will swear he saw Hero meeting a man secretly. He'll mention it casually to Claudio, just concerned gossip. The seed gets planted. That's not enough to break an engagement, Baracchio protested. John's smile was cold. No, but it's enough to make Claudio watch her more carefully, to make him doubt. And doubt once planted grows like kudzu. It chokes everything. Why Margaret? She's innocent in this. Everyone's innocent until they're useful, John said flatly. Margaret wants to matter, wants to be seen. I'll tell her it's a prank, a joke on the overly serious Hero. She'll play along. And when it all falls apart, who's going to believe her over Hero's damaged reputation? Baracchio stood, pacing the cramped room. This is wrong, John. These are good people. Good people, John repeated, his voice thick with bitterness. My brother is good people. My father, who refused to acknowledge me for 15 years, was good people. Goodness is just another word for power, for privilege. And I'm tired of watching good people win while the rest of us lose. This isn't about winning, Baracchio said quietly. This is about hurting your brother through two innocent people. Yes, John agreed without shame. It is. Are you with me or not? Baracchio looked at his oldest friend, at the scar on his face, at the accumulated bitterness of a lifetime of being second best, second loved, second thought. And because loyalty is sometimes stronger than morality, because friendship can be its own kind of trap, he nodded. I'm with you. Friday arrived with a break in the heat. A cool front had pushed through overnight, bringing with it clouds that promised rain but never delivered, just blessed relief from the relentless sun. The campus stirred with preparation for the evening's party. Dean Leonato had opened his house and the adjoining lawn, stringing lights between the magnolia trees, setting up tables borrowed from the cafeteria, arranging for the music department's jazz ensemble to play. By late afternoon, the smell of barbecue drifted across campus from the massive smoker that had been going since dawn. Ribs, chicken, pulled pork, food that spoke of celebration, of community, of survival transformed into joy. Students who weren't invited found excuses to walk past the house, drawn by the music of preparation, the promise of something beautiful in a world that often felt ugly. Beatrice stood before her mirror, fastening pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother. She wore a dress of deep green that hugged her waist before flowing to her knees, modest but elegant. Her hair was pulled back from her face with a matching headband, her lips painted a dark red. She looked, she had to admit, beautiful. And that admission came with a strange flutter of nerves she wasn't accustomed to feeling. Hero appeared in the doorway, resplendent in her blue dress, her pressed hair pinned up in an elegant chignon. You look stunning, she said softly. So do you, Beatrice replied. Claudio might actually pass out when he sees you. I'm nervous, Hero admitted, sitting on the edge of Beatrice's bed. Not about Claudio, but about everything this represents. We're making a statement. A Chinese-American man courting a black woman in Georgia in 1963. That's not just personal, it's political. Everything we do is political, Beatrice said, sitting beside her cousin. Breathing is political. Existing with dignity is political. You love him? Yes, Hero said without hesitation. Then that's all that matters. Let them talk. Let them threaten. Love is resistance too. Downstairs, Claudio arrived early with Don Pedro, both men dressed in their finest suits. Claudio's hands shook slightly as he adjusted his tie, and Don Pedro clapped him on the shoulder with paternal affection. Breathe, Don Pedro advised. You're not going into battle. Feels like it, Claudio admitted. My parents sent a telegram. They're not coming. They think it's too dangerous politically and physically for me to be courting Hero. Don Pedro's face darkened. I'm sorry, son. Don't be. I understand their fear. They built a life by keeping their heads down, by not making waves. But I can't live that way. Not after everything we've seen, everything we've done. Hero is worth the risk. When Hero descended the stairs and Claudio saw her, his face transformed into something like reverence. He met her at the bottom step, taking her hand with a gentleness that made Beatrice, watching from the landing, believe for the first time that maybe love wasn't a trap, but a door opening onto something vast. Then Benedick arrived, and Beatrice forgot to breathe. He wore a charcoal suit she'd never seen before, his glasses cleaned to gleaming, his hair perfectly shaped. But it was his expression when he saw her that stopped the world, open, vulnerable, something like wonder. He climbed the stairs slowly, ignoring everyone else, until he stood before her. "Beatrice," he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like prayer. "Benedick," she replied, and for once had no witty rejoinder, no sharp observation, just his name. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "I know you don't need me to tell you that. You know your own worth, but I wanted to say it anyway. You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "You look adequate," Beatrice managed, but her voice shook, betraying her. He smiled, understanding the translation. "Dance with me tonight? At least once. I suppose I could spare one dance," she said. "For charity's sake." "For charity," he agreed, but his eyes said something else entirely. The party bloomed as the sun set, transforming the Washington house and grounds into something magical. The jazz ensemble played Coltrane and Mingus, their music floating through the humid air like smoke. Faculty mingled with students, activists with academics, the natural hierarchy of campus life dissolving in the shared joy of the evening. Claudio and Hero moved through the crowd like royalty, his hand at the small of her back, her smile radiant. They received congratulations and blessings, though some faces showed concern, others showed disapproval, poorly masked. But they remained steady, anchored in each other. Benedick found himself in conversation with a group of students, discussing Baldwin and Camus, but his eyes kept tracking Beatrice across the lawn. She moved through the crowd like fire, animated and bright, drawing people to her. And when she laughed at something someone said, he felt it in his chest like a physical blow. Don Pedro noticed and smiled knowingly. He was about to approach Benedick when John materialized at his elbow, dressed simply but cleanly, his scarred face neutral. "Brother," John said, "nice party. Very respectable. I'm glad you came," Don Pedro said, meaning it. "Will you stay? Enjoy yourself?" "I'm not built for enjoyment," John said. "But I wanted to say I'm happy for Claudio and Hero. They deserve happiness." Something in his tone made Don Pedro study him more carefully. "John, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Can't a man offer congratulations without suspicion?" "You can," Don Pedro said slowly, "but you usually don't." John's smile was thin. "Maybe I'm changing. Maybe watching all this hope, all this love. Maybe it's infectious." He raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings." Don Pedro clinked his glass against John's, wanting to believe, but something cold moved in his gut like a warning. As full dark fell and the string lights glowed like captured stars, the music shifted to something slower. Claudio led Hero onto the makeshift dance floor, and they moved together with the easy grace of people who fit. Other couples joined them, the faculty, the students, the world shrinking to the space between two people swaying in time. Benedick approached Beatrice where she stood at the edge of the light, and without a word offered his hand. She took it. They moved onto the floor, his hand settling at her waist, hers on his shoulder, their other hands clasped between them. For a moment neither spoke, both overwhelmed by the simple fact of touching, of closeness without combat. "I meant what I said," Benedick said quietly close to her ear. "You're beautiful, but more than that, you're extraordinary, brave and brilliant, and everything I never knew I was looking for." Beatrice felt tears threaten and blinked them back fiercely. "Don't make me cry at a party, Benedick Porter. I have a reputation to maintain. Reputations are overrated, he said. I'm learning that. I'm learning that being known, truly known by another person, is worth more than any armor. Are you saying you love me? Beatrice asked, her voice barely audible over the music. Benedick pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. I'm saying I'm trying to be brave enough to love you the way you deserve. I'm saying yes, Beatrice Washington. I love you. Probably have since the moment you told me my opinions were intellectual cowardice dressed up as wisdom. Beatrice laughed through the tears that finally escaped. I love you too, you impossible man, even though it terrifies me. We'll be terrified together, Benedick promised. And when he kissed her there under the lights with half the campus watching, Beatrice felt something inside her unlock, some door she'd been guarding swing open onto possibility. The party swirled around them, joy and music and the promise of futures worth fighting for. And in the shadows at the edge of the light, John Freeman watched with eyes gone cold, his plan already in motion, his revenge taking shape like a storm on the horizon. The party wound down near midnight, guests departing with full bellies and lighter hearts, the jazz ensemble packing their instruments with the satisfied air of musicians who'd played well. Claudia walked Hero to her door, their fingers intertwined, neither wanting the evening to end. I've never been happier, Hero said softly, her back against the door frame, looking up at him in the porch light. Neither have I, Claudia replied and kissed her with a tenderness that made the night feel holy. He walked back across campus in a daze of joy, barely noticing the cicadas or the heat that had returned with nightfall. His mind was full of Hero. Her laugh, her grace, the way she'd felt in his arms while dancing. He was so lost in these thoughts that he almost didn't notice Conrad, the maintenance supervisor, standing near the library, smoking a cigarette. Mr. Chen, Conrad called out, his voice uncertain. Can I talk to you a moment? Claudio stopped, pulled from his reverie. Conrad was a man in his 50s, reliable and quiet, someone who'd worked at Magnolia Grove for 30 years. Of course. What is it? Conrad shifted uncomfortably, dropping his cigarette and grinding it under his heel. I don't like carrying tales, but I figure you should know. I was doing my rounds Thursday night, checking the buildings before locking up, and I saw something at the library that troubled me. A cold finger traced Claudio's spine. What did you see? Miss Hero was in her usual study room, the one she uses for tutoring. But she wasn't alone. There was a man with her, and they were close. Real close. I didn't want to intrude, figured it wasn't my business. But now, with the party tonight and everyone talking about you two, I thought you should know. The world tilted. You're certain it was Hero? Same build, same way of moving. The lights were low, but I've worked here long enough to know the students. I'm sorry, son. Maybe there's an explanation. Claudio stood frozen, his joy curdling into something sick and dark. Thursday night? But that's when I was in Atlanta with Don Pedro. Like I said, maybe there's an explanation, Conrad repeated, but his eyes said he didn't believe it. After Conrad left, Claudio remained standing in the dark, his mind racing. It couldn't be true. Hero was goodness itself, incapable of deception, and yet doubt is a poison that works quickly once introduced to the bloodstream. Thursday night she told him she'd be tutoring late. What if that was a lie? What if everything he believed about her was built on false foundations? He found Don Pedro still at the Washington house, helping Dean Leonardo clear tables. I need to talk to you, Claudio said, his voice hollow. They walked to the edge of the property, out of earshot. Claudio recounted what Conrad had told him, and with each word, the poison spread. Don Pedro's face grew grave. Conrad is reliable, not given to gossip. But this doesn't sound like Hero. There must be an explanation. Or there's a truth I've been too blind to see, Claudio said bitterly. Maybe she was playing me. Maybe the innocent act was just that, an act. Don't jump to conclusions, Don Pedro urged, but his own certainty was shaken. We should investigate, ask questions. I don't want to ask questions, Claudio said, his voice rising. I want to know why the woman I love would betray me before we've even had a chance to begin. John emerged from the shadows then, as if summoned by misery. I overheard, he said quietly. And I'm sorry, Claudio. I was hoping I was wrong. Wrong about what? Don Pedro demanded. John looked genuinely pained, his performance perfect. I've seen things, small things that didn't make sense until now. Hero receiving notes, slipping away during campus events, always with an excuse. I thought I was being paranoid, seeing conspiracy where there was innocence. But if Conrad saw what he says he saw... You're lying, Don Pedro said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Why would I lie? John asked. What do I gain from destroying a romance I publicly endorsed? I wanted to be wrong, brother. But Baraccio told me he's seen her too, meeting someone in secret. Then we confront her, Don Pedro said. Tomorrow publicly. If she's innocent, she'll have nothing to hide. And if she's guilty, Claudio asked, his voice breaking. Then she's not who we thought she was, John said softly, driving the knife deeper. Then we've all been deceived. Inside the house, unaware of the poison spreading outside, Beatrice and Hero cleaned up together in the kitchen, still glowing from the evening. Beatrice hummed as she dried dishes, a sure sign of contentment that Hero had rarely witnessed. So you and Benedick, Hero said with a smile. I knew it would happen. Did you? Beatrice asked, but without her usual defensiveness. I didn't. Or maybe I did, and was too stubborn to admit it. He's impossible, you know, arrogant and intellectual and completely maddening. And you love him. And I love him, Beatrice agreed, marveling at how easy the words came. Who knew that falling could feel like flying? Hero hugged her cousin impulsively. I'm happy for you, for us both. We're building something real. Something that matters. Yes, Beatrice agreed, not knowing that outside in the darkness the thing they were building was already being undermined, the foundations already cracking under the weight of lies. Benedick walked home through the quiet campus, his heart full in a way he'd never experienced. For years he'd armored himself against feeling, convinced that love was weakness. But tonight, holding Beatrice, kissing her, feeling her love returned, it wasn't weakness. It was the strongest thing he'd ever done. He passed Claudio on the path and stopped to congratulate him again, but something in the younger man's face gave him pause. Claudio, are you all right? Fine, Claudio said, his voice tight. Just tired. But he wasn't fine. He was a man whose world had shifted on its axis, whose joy had been replaced by corrosive doubt. And as he walked to his dormitory, his mind conjured images he couldn't escape. Hero in darkness with another man, her virtue a performance, her love a calculated deception. By morning the poison would have spread further. By tomorrow's confrontation, it would have consumed everything. And the joy of Friday night would seem like a dream from another lifetime, beautiful and irretrievable as innocence itself. Saturday morning dawned gray and oppressive, the promised rain finally arriving in a light drizzle that made everything shimmer and blur. The chapel at the center of Magnolia Grove campus stood white and pristine, its steeple reaching toward low clouds. By 10 o'clock it was filled to capacity. Faculty, students, community members, all gathered to witness what was supposed to be a formal engagement ceremony, a public commitment before the wedding that would follow in a few weeks. Hero sat in a small room behind the chapel's sanctuary, wearing a simple white dress with lace sleeves, her hair crowned with baby's breath. She looked like a painting of innocence, her hands folded in her lap, her face serene despite the nervous flutter in her chest. Beatrice stood beside her in a lavender dress, adjusting Hero's collar with gentle hands. You're shaking, Beatrice observed. Happy nerves, Hero said, but something in the air felt wrong, heavy with more than humidity. In the sanctuary, Claudio stood at the altar beside Don Pedro, his face a mask of stone. He'd barely slept, his mind tortured by images of Hero's betrayal. Don Pedro had tried to counsel patience, investigation, but John's words and Conrad's testimony had built a wall of certainty around Claudio's heart. He felt both righteous and sick, a man about to expose a lie but destroying his own hope in the process. Dean Leonato entered in his finest suit, walking toward the altar with the proud bearing of a man about to give his blessing to his daughter's future. The organist began to play, and the congregation rose. Hero appeared at the back of the chapel, and a collective sigh moved through the crowd. She was radiant, glowing, perfect. She walked down the aisle alone, as was the custom for this ceremony, her eyes finding Claudio's. But instead of the love she expected to see there, she found something cold and hard that made her steps falter. She reached the altar. Dean Leonato took his place before them, a prayer book in his hands. He smiled at his daughter, at Claudio, at the assembled witnesses. We gather today to celebrate the commitment of two young people, to bless their intention to marry, to witness their pledge before God and community. Wait, Claudio said, his voice cutting through the moment like a blade. Before we proceed, I have a question for Hero Washington. The chapel went silent. Hero's face showed confusion, then the first flicker of fear. Claudio, she whispered. He turned to face her fully, his eyes blazing with hurt disguised as anger. Tell me, Hero, tell everyone here. Are you pure? Are you honest? Have you kept yourself as you claimed, or is that another lie? Gasps echoed through the chapel. Dean Leonato stepped forward, his face shocked. What are you saying, son? I'm saying your daughter is not what she pretends to be, Claudio said, his voice rising. I'm saying that while I was in Atlanta fighting for freedom, she was here entertaining another man in secret. I'm saying she's played us all for fools. That's not true, Hero cried out, her voice breaking. Claudio, I don't understand. Thursday night, Claudio said. The library. You were seen, Hero. In the dark with a man, close enough that there is no innocent explanation. I was tutoring, Hero protested, tears streaming down her face. I was alone, working on... Lies, Claudio shouted, and the word echoed off the chapel walls. Conrad saw you, Borachio confirmed it. Even Don John, who wanted to believe in you, had to admit he'd seen signs of your deception. Don Pedro stepped forward, his face grave. I'm sorry, Leonato. I vouched for Claudio's character, but I cannot vouch for your daughter's virtue. Not with these witnesses. Leonato staggered as if struck. He looked at Hero, his face a battlefield of love and doubt. Daughter, is this true? No, Hero sobbed. Papa, I swear on everything holy I've done nothing wrong. I don't know what they're talking about. Thursday night I was tutoring Marcus Thompson in mathematics until 8. Then I came straight home. You saw me, Papa. You know I came home. At 9:30, Leonato said slowly, and doubt crept into his voice. You came home at 9:30, and the library closes at 9. I stopped to talk with Margaret about organizing next week's. Hero stopped, seeing disbelief blooming in her father's eyes. Papa, please, you know me. You know I wouldn't. I thought I knew you, Leonato said, and his voice broke. But how can I defend you against multiple witnesses? How can I claim your innocence when men of honor say otherwise? Beatrice pushed through the crowd, her face fierce with protective rage. This is insane. Hero is innocent. I know her. I know her soul. Whatever these men think they saw, they're wrong. 3 witnesses, Don Pedro said heavily, all saying the same thing. Then 3 witnesses are lying, Beatrice shouted, or mistaken, or part of some conspiracy, because Hero Washington is incapable of deception. But the congregation murmured, doubt spreading like contagion. In 1963 Georgia, a black woman's reputation was a fragile thing, easily shattered, impossible to repair. The accusation alone was nearly as damaging as proof. Hero looked around at the faces, some sympathetic, some judgmental, all doubting, and something inside her broke. I am innocent, she said, her voice barely audible. Before God, I am innocent. Then God will judge you, Claudio said bitterly. But I will not marry a woman who makes a mockery of honor. He turned and walked down the aisle, his footsteps echoing in the terrible silence. Don Pedro followed after a moment's hesitation, and then John, wearing an expression of sorrowful satisfaction. Hero swayed, her face going pale as death. Papa, she whispered, reaching for her father. But Leonato stepped back, his face twisted in shame and anguish. I cannot defend you. I cannot bear this shame. Hero's eyes rolled back and she collapsed, her white dress spreading around her like a shroud. Beatrice caught her before she hit the floor, cradling her cousin's head, and when she looked up at the assembled crowd, her face was terrible with rage. "Get out!" she screamed. "All of you! You come here to witness love and end up trafficking in lies! Get out!" The congregation fled, shuffling and murmuring, leaving only Beatrice kneeling with Hero's unconscious form, Leonato standing frozen in horror, and Benedick, who'd watched everything from the back pew with growing certainty that something was terribly, terribly wrong. They carried Hero to the small rectory behind the chapel, laying her on a narrow cot in a room that smelled of candle wax and old hymnals. The minister, Reverend Francis, a dignified man in his 60s who'd baptized Hero as an infant, brought cool water and cloth. He'd watched the scene unfold with increasing horror, and his face now showed both compassion and calculation. Hero's eyes fluttered open after a few minutes, confusion giving way to memory, memory giving way to fresh anguish. She turned her face to the wall and wept silently, her shoulders shaking. Beatrice knelt beside her, gripping her hand with fierce tenderness. "We'll fix this. We'll prove your innocence." "How?" Hero whispered. "3 men testified against me. My own father believes I'm ruined." Leonato stood in the corner, his face aged a decade in minutes. "How can I defend you? If you're innocent, who would do this? Why would Conrad lie? Why would John, who has nothing to gain?" "That's exactly the question," Benedick said from the doorway. Everyone turned to him, and he stepped inside, his face grave. "John has everything to gain. He hates his brother, resents his success, his happiness. What better way to wound Don Pedro than to destroy the romance he championed? You're suggesting an elaborate conspiracy based on nothing but your loyalty to Beatrice," Leonato said bitterly. "I'm suggesting we investigate before we condemn," Benedick countered. "I know Hero. I've watched her for 2 years. She's incapable of the deception Claudio describes. People are capable of surprising things," Leonato said, but his voice wavered. Reverend Francis cleared his throat. "I have a suggestion, unorthodox but perhaps necessary. Let us announce that Hero died from the shame, from the shock. Let her death be reported across campus, across town." "What?" Beatrice said, horrified. "Hear me," the Reverend continued. "If Hero is alive, she's ruined, her reputation destroyed, her future erased. But if she dies, if this scandal ends in tragedy, people will reconsider. They'll examine the accusations more carefully. Guilt will make them search for truth. And Claudio, if he truly loved her, her death will crack whatever certainty he's built around his accusations." Hero sat up slowly, her face streaked with tears. "You want me to disappear? To let everyone think I'm dead?" "Until we can prove your innocence," Reverend Francis said gently. "Until truth has time to emerge from these lies." Leonato pressed his hands to his face. "My daughter, dead from shame. The story will spread like wildfire." "Better that than the alternative," the Reverend said. "Better temporary death than permanent ruin." Hero looked at Beatrice, her eyes hollow. "What do you think?" Beatrice wanted to rage, to fight, to tear down the world that made such choices necessary. But she understood the brutal mathematics of reputation in 1963 Georgia. "I think we don't have better options," she said quietly. "But I swear on everything holy, I will find out who did this and make them pay." "Then it's decided," Reverend Francis said. "Hero Washington died this afternoon from a combination of shock and a weak heart. She'll be taken to my sister's house in Savannah, where she'll stay until this is resolved." Within an hour, the story began to spread. Dean Leonato emerged from the chapel looking shattered, telling anyone who asked that his daughter had died, that the shame and shock had been too much for her gentle heart. The news moved through campus like wind through grass. Hero Washington was dead at 21, a casualty of scandal and heartbreak. In his dormitory room, Claudio received the news from Don Pedro and sat down heavily on his narrow bed. His face went white, then gray. "Dead?" he repeated. "She's dead?" Her heart gave out, Don Pedro said, his own voice thick with unshed emotion. The shame, the public humiliation, it was too much. Claudio stared at his hands and for the first time, doubt cracked through his certainty. I didn't want this. I just wanted the truth. The truth, Don Pedro echoed bitterly. We were so certain we had it. John stood by the window, his face carefully neutral, but inside he felt the first stirrings of something like regret. He'd wanted to hurt his brother, to prove that Pedro's judgment wasn't infallible. He hadn't wanted anyone to die, but he buried the feeling quickly, telling himself it wasn't his fault, that Hero's weakness wasn't his responsibility. In the rectory, Beatrice and Benedick stood alone in the fading afternoon light. Hero had already been spirited away in Reverend Francis's car, heading south towards Savannah and temporary safety. The room felt haunted by her absence. I know who did this, Beatrice said, her voice low and dangerous. John Freeman orchestrated this. I don't know how yet, but I know it was him. Probably, Benedick agreed, but proving it is another matter. Beatrice turned to face him, her eyes blazing. You said you loved me. Last night you said you loved me. I do, Benedick said without hesitation. Then prove it, Beatrice said. Challenge Claudio. Make him answer for what he's done to Hero. Benedick went still. Beatrice, that's not... Not what? Not simple, not safe. My cousin is dead to the world because a man she loved believed lies about her without question. If you love me, if your love means anything, then you'll stand up for her honor. You'll make Claudio face consequences. You're asking me to fight him, Benedick said slowly. To challenge him to... What? A duel? This isn't the 19th century. No, it's 1963 and honor still matters, Beatrice said fiercely. Maybe more now than ever. We're fighting for dignity, for respect, for the right to be believed when we tell the truth. If we don't fight for that here, in this small moment, then what's the point of fighting for it anywhere? Benedick looked at the woman he loved, saw the pain and rage and desperate need for justice in her face, and felt something settle in his chest. You're right, he said quietly. If I love you, and I do, then I have to act like it matters. I have to be brave enough to risk what matters to me for what matters to you. Then you'll do it? I'll confront Claudio, Benedick said. I'll demand he answer for this. And if he won't make it right, then yes, I'll challenge him. Beatrice closed the distance between them and kissed him with desperate gratitude. Thank you, she whispered against his mouth. Thank you for being brave. After she left, Benedick stood alone in the gathering darkness, wondering if bravery and foolishness were really so different, and knowing it didn't matter. He'd chosen his path, chosen love over safety, and there was no turning back now. Sunday morning arrived with actual rain, heavy and relentless, turning the campus paths to mud and washing the streets clean. The chapel held a memorial service for Hero Washington, not a funeral, since the family said they were taking the body to relatives in South Carolina, but a gathering to mourn and remember. The pews were packed with students and faculty, many weeping openly, all grappling with the waste of a young life. Claudio sat in the back, his face haggard, looking like he hadn't slept. Beside him, Don Pedro sat rigid with grief and growing doubt. At the front, Dean Leonato delivered a eulogy that was part performance, part genuine anguish, praising his daughter's virtue, her kindness, her pure heart, every word a knife to those who doubted her. She was innocent, Leonato said, his voice breaking. Whatever was said, whatever was believed, my hero was innocent. And now she's gone, and we can never make that right. In the pew, Claudio flinched as if struck. Benedick stood in the rain outside after the service, waiting. When Claudio emerged with Don Pedro, Benedick stepped into his path. I need to speak with you, Benedick said, his voice cold. Not now, Don Pedro said. Can't you see he's suffering? He should suffer, Benedick said flatly. He killed an innocent woman with his accusations. Claudio's face crumpled. I didn't know. I didn't think. You didn't think, Benedick agreed. You believed the worst of someone who loved you, based on whispers and shadows. You demanded public humiliation instead of private conversation. And now she's dead. Benedick, what are you doing? Don Pedro asked, bewildered. I'm holding him accountable, Benedick said. Claudio Chen, you're a coward and a fool. You destroyed something precious because your pride was wounded, and if you have any honor left, you'll answer for it. What do you want from me? Claudio asked, his voice raw. I want you to admit you might have been wrong. I want you to question your certainty. And I want you to understand that love requires trust, and you had none. Don Pedro stepped between them. Enough. We all share responsibility for what happened. I vouched for the accusations. I should have demanded more proof. You should have known her better, Benedick said. Both of you. He walked away into the rain, leaving them standing in front of the chapel, drenched and miserable. That afternoon, in a cheap bar on the edge of town where Magnolia Grove students never went, Borachio sat drinking away his guilt. Each shot of whiskey was meant to drown the image of Hero collapsing, the news of her death, the weight of knowing he'd helped make it happen, but the guilt only grew heavier. Margaret found him there, her face streaked with tears. She slid into the booth across from him without asking permission. She's dead, Margaret said. Hero's dead because of what we did. We didn't do anything, Borachio said, but his voice lacked conviction. It was just supposed to be a trick, a little doubt planted. You used me, Margaret said, her voice rising. You told me it was a harmless prank. You had me meet you in that study room, had Conrad see us, made it look like I was Hero. And now she's dead. It wasn't supposed to go this far, Borachio said desperately. John said, John Freeman. Margaret spat the name. That bitter, twisted man. I should have known better than to trust him. But you were supposed to be decent. Borachio put his head in his hands. I know. God help me, I know. Conrad entered the bar then, drawn by some instinct or guilty conscience. When he saw Borachio and Margaret together, something clicked into place. It was you, he said slowly, approaching their table. In the library, Thursday night, I saw you with Margaret, not Hero. In the dark from a distance, we look similar enough, Margaret said bitterly. That was the point. Make you think you saw Hero with a man, start the rumors, destroy her reputation. Conrad sat down heavily. I testified against an innocent girl. I helped kill her. We all did, Borachio said. John orchestrated it, but we played our parts. The three of them sat in miserable silence, the jukebox playing something mournful, the bartender wisely leaving them alone. Finally, Conrad stood. We have to tell the truth, he said. We have to go to Dean Leonato, to Claudio, and confess what really happened. It won't bring her back, Margaret said. No, Conrad agreed, but it might give her memory the honor she deserves, and it might stop John from doing this to someone else. That evening, as the rain finally stopped and a weak sun broke through the clouds, Conrad, Borachio, and Margaret stood on Dean Leonato's porch, sodden and scared. When Beatrice answered the door and saw them, her face hardened into something dangerous. You have nerve coming here, she said. We have a confession, Conrad said quietly. Can we speak to the dean? Leonato emerged, his face gray with grief. When he saw Borachio, something flickered in his eyes. You're John's friend. I was, Borachio said, and I helped him destroy your daughter. But I'm here to tell you the truth, for whatever that's worth now. They told the story, all of it. John's bitterness, the plan to make it look like Hero was meeting someone secretly, Margaret's unwitting participation, Conrad's mistaken testimony. With each revelation, Leonato's face shifted from grief to rage to something like hope. She was innocent, he breathed. My Hero was innocent. Completely, Borachio confirmed. And I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. Beatrice grabbed Borachio by the shirt, pulling him close. Sorry doesn't resurrect the dead. Sorry doesn't undo what you did. I know, Borachio said, not resisting. But the truth matters. Even now, it matters. Leonato stood abruptly. We need to find Don Pedro and Claudio. They need to hear this, and then, his voice turned cold. Then we need to find John Freeman and make him answer for what he's done. As they prepared to spread the truth, as the machinery of justice slowly began to turn, Hero sat in a small house in Savannah, listening to rain on the roof, not knowing yet that her death had accomplished what her life couldn't. It had forced the truth into the light. Monday morning broke clear and cool, the storm having passed through and left everything sharp-edged and clean. Magnolia Grove campus felt subdued, students moving quietly between classes, faculty speaking in hushed tones. The news of Hero Washington's death had cast a pall over everything, made more painful by the circumstances that preceded it. Leonato found Don Pedro in his office, sorting through papers with mechanical efficiency, his face showing the strain of grief and doubt. When Leonato entered without knocking, Don Pedro looked up, and something in the dean's face made him stand. "We need to talk," Leonato said, his voice steady but cold. "And you need to bring Claudio." 20 minutes later, they gathered in Leonato's study. Don Pedro, Claudio, Leonato, Beatrice, and Benedick. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Claudio looked like a ghost, his eyes red-rimmed, his hands shaking slightly. "I've learned the truth," Leonato said without preamble. "About Thursday night, about the accusations against my daughter. Would you like to hear it?" Claudio's face went even paler. "What truth?" "The truth that Hero was innocent, that she was set up, framed by a conspiracy designed to destroy her and through her, wound others." Leonato's voice was measured, but underneath it ran a current of barely controlled rage. "The truth that your accusations killed an innocent woman." Don Pedro stepped forward. "What are you saying?" Conrad testified. John confirmed. "John orchestrated it," Beatrice cut in, her voice sharp as broken glass. With Borachio's help and Margaret's unwitting participation, they staged a scene in the library, made it look like Hero was meeting someone. Conrad saw Margaret, not Hero, but in the dark, from a distance. He couldn't tell the difference. The room went silent. Claudio swayed as if he might fall. "That's not possible," Don Pedro said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Borachio confessed last night," Leonato said. "He, Conrad, and Margaret came here, consumed by guilt, and told us everything. John Freeman hated you, Don Pedro, hated your success and happiness. So he decided to destroy the romance you championed, to prove your judgment fallible. And you—" He turned his gaze to Claudio. "You were so quick to believe the worst, so eager to humiliate her publicly, that you never stopped to question whether what you were told was true." Claudio collapsed into a chair, his face in his hands. No, I didn't. She can't be. She's dead," Leonato said flatly. "Dead because you believed lies without investigation. Dead because her reputation meant less to you than your wounded pride." "I loved her," Claudio whispered. "You loved an idea of her," Beatrice said coldly. "You never loved her enough to trust her, to give her the benefit of doubt, to believe in her character over gossip." Don Pedro stood motionless, his face a mask of horror. "John did this? My brother?" "Your brother," Leonato confirmed. "Driven by bitterness and jealousy, he's already fled. Borachio said he left campus last night when he heard about the confession. Probably headed north, trying to disappear." Claudio looked up, his face ravaged. "What can I do? How can I possibly make this right?" "You can't," Leonato said simply. "My daughter is dead. Nothing you do will change that." "Then I'll die too," Claudio said, his voice breaking. "No," Leonato interrupted, and something in his voice shifted, became less harsh. "You'll live. You'll live with what you've done. You'll honor Hero's memory by being the man she believed you were, before doubt poisoned everything." "I don't deserve—" "You don't," Leonato agreed. "But Hero would have wanted you to be better, not destroyed. So here's what you'll do. Tonight, at the chapel, you'll read a poem at her memorial. You'll tell everyone gathered that she was innocent, that she was wrongly accused, that her death is a stain on all of us who believed lies over truth." "I will," Claudio said. "Anything, everything. And tomorrow," Leonato continued, his voice steady, "you'll do something else for me. A final service to Hero's memory." "Anything," Claudio repeated. Leonato nodded. "I'll tell you when the time comes. For now, live with your guilt. Let it teach you something about trust and love and the difference between the two." After Claudio left, looking like a man condemned, Don Pedro remained. He stood before Leonato with his shoulders straight, accepting whatever judgment was coming. "I vouched for the accusations," Don Pedro said quietly. "I should have known better. I should have demanded proof, investigation. Instead, I accepted my brother's word because—" He paused, his voice catching. "Because part of me has always felt guilty about John, about having what he didn't have, being acknowledged while he was denied. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to give him credibility. And in doing so, you destroyed an innocent girl," Leonato said. "Yes," Don Pedro acknowledged. "I carry that. I'll carry it the rest of my life." Leonato studied the man he'd considered a friend, a brother in the struggle. "You're a good man, Pedro. But good men can do terrible damage when they stop thinking clearly. John played on your guilt, your desire to include him. He weaponized your love against you. That doesn't absolve me." "No," Leonato agreed. "It doesn't. But it explains. And understanding why we fail is the first step toward doing better." After Don Pedro left, Beatrice found herself alone with Benedick in the study. The weight of the last few days pressed down on both of them. The joy of Friday night, the horror of Saturday, the grinding work of uncovering truth. "You challenged Claudio for me," Beatrice said quietly. "You were willing to fight him." "I was," Benedick confirmed. "I am still, if you want me to." Beatrice shook her head. "He's already destroyed. Adding violence to this tragedy won't help Hero." She moved to the window, looking out at the campus where students walked in the autumn sunlight, unaware of the drama unfolding. "Do you know what the worst part is? Hero is innocent. We've proven it, but she's still gone. Dead as far as the world knows. Her reputation is restored, but she can't enjoy it." "Is she really dead?" Benedick asked carefully. Beatrice turned to look at him, her face unreadable. "What makes you ask that?" "Because your uncle said Claudio would do something tomorrow to honor Hero's memory. Because this all feels like a play still unfolding, like we haven't reached the final act yet." Beatrice smiled slightly. The first real smile in days. "You're too clever for your own good, Benedick Porter." "So she's alive," he said, relief flooding his voice. "She's safe," Beatrice said carefully. "Beyond that I can't say, not yet. But tomorrow might bring surprises." Benedick crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "When this is over, when Hero is restored and justice is done, can we talk about us, about what we are to each other?" "We're everything," Beatrice said simply. "Isn't that obvious by now?" "I need to hear you say it." "I love you," Beatrice said, meeting his eyes. "I love you, and I want a life with you. I want to fight beside you, argue with you, build something real with you. I want all of it, Benedick. The fear and the joy and the terrifying vulnerability of being known." He kissed her then, soft and deep, a promise sealed. "When Hero comes home," he said against her lips, "we'll figure out the rest." "When Hero comes home," Beatrice agreed, and let herself hope that tomorrow would bring restoration to match the ruin of yesterday. That evening, as the sun set over Magnolia Grove in shades of orange and purple, the chapel filled once again. This gathering was different from Sunday's memorial, smaller, more intimate, but charged with an awareness that something important was about to happen. Word had spread quietly through campus that new truths had emerged about Hero Washington's death, that the story was more complicated than anyone had known. Claudio stood at the front of the chapel, a single sheet of paper trembling in his hands. He looked diminished, hollowed out, a young man who'd aged years in days. Beside the altar, someone had placed a photograph of Hero, her graduation picture from high school, her smile bright and hopeful, her eyes full of future. The congregation settled into silence. Claudio cleared his throat once, twice, trying to find his voice. "I stand before you," he began, his voice barely audible, "as a man who has committed a grave sin, not a sin of action but of assumption, of pride, of failing to trust what I should have known in my bones was true." He looked down at the paper, then set it aside, speaking from his heart instead. Hero Washington was innocent, completely, utterly innocent. The accusations I made against her were based on lies, on a conspiracy designed to hurt others through her. I believed those lies because His voice cracked. Because I was afraid. Afraid that something so good, so pure, couldn't really be mine. Afraid that I didn't deserve her. And that fear made me cruel. Tears rolled down his face unchecked. I killed her. Not with my hands, but with my words, with my public humiliation of her, with my failure to trust. And I will carry that guilt until I die. But tonight, I want everyone to know Hero Washington was virtuous, honest, kind, and true. She deserved better than me. She deserved better than all of us. He picked up another paper, this one containing a poem he'd written through the long, sleepless night. Done to death by slanderous tongues was the hero that here lies death. In guerdon of her wrongs gives her fame, which never dies. So the life that died with shame lives in death with glorious fame. His voice broke on the final line, and he stood there weeping openly, a man destroyed by his own actions. The congregation sat in heavy silence, many crying with him, all feeling the weight of collective guilt, for believing, for doubting, for failing to defend innocence against accusation. Dean Leonato rose and approached Claudio, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Hero's spirit hears you," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "And I believe wherever she is now, she forgives you, because that was her nature, to forgive, to hope, to believe in redemption." "I don't deserve forgiveness," Claudio whispered. "None of us do," Leonato replied. "But we receive it anyway. That's grace." He turned to address the congregation. "Tomorrow morning there will be a small private ceremony. Claudio will perform one final service to Hero's memory. Marrying her cousin, a girl from Savannah, sight unseen, to honor the bond he should have had with my daughter. It's an old custom, a way of preserving the commitment that was broken." Murmurs moved through the chapel. It was unusual, certainly, but there was something fitting about it. A penance, a symbolic restoration. After the service, people filed out quietly, leaving Claudio alone in the chapel with the photograph. He knelt before it, his hands clasped in prayer or supplication or simple grief. Don Pedro found him there an hour later, still kneeling. "Come on, son. You need to rest." "How did it happen?" Claudio asked without moving. "How did we become men who destroyed an innocent woman?" Don Pedro sat in the front pew, his own face haggard. "We stopped trusting our knowledge of her and started trusting our fear of being fooled. We let pride override love. And my brother understood that weakness and exploited it perfectly. Have they found John?" "No," Don Pedro said heavily. "He's disappeared. Maybe that's for the best. If I saw him right now, I don't know what I'd do." "I know what I'd do," Claudio said, his voice flat. "But it wouldn't bring her back." They sat in silence for a long time, two men grappling with the consequences of their failures, the chapel growing dark around them. Outside, Benedick walked with Beatrice through the campus, her arm linked through his. They'd become inseparable since Friday night, drawn together by love, but also by shared purpose, the work of uncovering truth, of protecting what mattered. "Tomorrow will be strange," Beatrice said, "watching Claudio marry a stranger who's actually Hero. Will he recognize her?" "Leonato said she'll wear a veil," Benedick replied, "that it won't be removed until after the vows. I'm not sure if that's mercy or additional torture." "Both," Beatrice said. "Everything is both these days, grief and hope, ending and beginning, death and resurrection." "Speaking of resurrection," Benedick said carefully, "when this is over, when Hero is restored, will you marry me, Beatrice Washington?" She stopped walking, turning to face him in the lamplight. "Are you proposing?" "Badly," Benedick admitted. "I've never done it before, but yes, I'm proposing. I'm asking you to bind your life to mine, to let me love you imperfectly for as long as we both live, to build something together that's stronger than either of us alone." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, which annoyed her because she hated crying. "That's the worst proposal I've ever heard." "It's the only one you've heard," Benedick pointed out. "True," Beatrice conceded, "which makes it both the worst and the best." She cupped his face in her hands. "Yes, Benedick Porter, I'll marry you. I'll argue with you and challenge you and love you until the day I die." They kissed under the street lamp, and somewhere in the distance a radio played Ray Charles singing, "I Can't Stop Loving You," and the world felt full of possibility despite all the pain that had preceded this moment. Tomorrow would bring revelation. Tomorrow would bring Hero back from the dead, would restore what had been broken, would prove that truth, though delayed, could still prevail. But tonight, in the darkness, two couples held on to love like a lifeline. Claudio to his grief and hope for redemption, Benedick and Beatrice to their newfound certainty that being known was worth the risk of being hurt. The campus settled into sleep, and above it all, stars emerged in a clear sky, indifferent and eternal, witnessing human drama play out in its small corner of Georgia, in its particular moment of history, where love and justice tangled together like vines, inseparable and necessary. Tuesday morning dawned with the kind of golden light that makes everything look blessed. The small chapel was decorated simply, white flowers, candles, the morning sun streaming through stained glass windows, painting everything in colors of promise. This was not a public ceremony. Only the essential witnesses gathered: Dean Leonato, Beatrice, Benedick, Don Pedro, and a handful of trusted faculty who'd been told the truth. Claudio stood at the altar in a dark suit, his face composed but pale, accepting his penance. He'd agreed to marry sight unseen, to honor Hero's memory by taking responsibility for a cousin he'd never met, to live the rest of his life trying to be worthy of what he'd destroyed. Reverend Francis stood ready, his prayer book open. "We are gathered for an unusual ceremony," he said quietly. "But then, these are unusual times. Love and honor require unusual actions." The side door opened, and a young woman entered wearing a simple white dress, her face covered by a delicate lace veil that obscured her features completely. She moved with quiet grace, and something in the way she carried herself made Claudio's breath catch, a familiar rhythm, a remembered elegance. But it couldn't be. It was impossible. She approached the altar, and Beatrice stood as her attendant, her face carefully neutral but her eyes bright with suppressed emotion. Benedick stood beside Claudio as witness, his hand briefly gripping the younger man's shoulder in support. "Before we begin," Reverend Francis said, "I must ask, Claudio Chen, do you take this woman as your wife, unseen and unknown, as an act of faith and penance?" "I do," Claudio said, his voice steady. "I swear before God to honor her, protect her, and spend my life trying to be worthy of the gift I'm being given." "And do you," the Reverend turned to the veiled woman, "take this man as your husband, knowing what he has done, choosing forgiveness over bitterness?" The woman's voice came soft but clear through the veil. "I do." Claudio's head snapped up. That voice. He knew that voice the way he knew his own heartbeat. "Then by the power vested in me," Reverend Francis said, "I pronounce you husband and wife. You may unveil your bride." Claudio's hands shook as he reached for the veil. He lifted it slowly, afraid to hope, terrified of disappointment, and found himself staring into Hero Washington's living, breathing, impossibly present face. "Hero," he whispered, and the word came out broken, disbelieving, a prayer answered. "You're alive, you're... How?" "I was hidden," Hero said softly, tears streaming down her face. "Sent away so that truth could emerge, so that the lies could be exposed without my presence complicating everything." Claudio fell to his knees before her, gripping her hands, pressing them to his forehead. "I'm sorry. God, Hero, I'm so sorry. I should have trusted you. I should have known." "Shh," Hero said, kneeling with him, cupping his face in her hands. "I forgive you. I forgave you the moment it happened, because I understood. You were manipulated, deceived. We both were. I don't deserve your forgiveness." "No one deserves forgiveness," Hero said gently. "That's what makes it grace. Can you forgive yourself? Can you trust me now? Truly trust me, even when things seem impossible?" "With everything I am," Claudio swore. "For the rest of my life I will trust you first, question later, Believe in you over any evidence to the contrary." They kissed then, a reunion and a beginning, and the small congregation burst into applause and tears. Beatrice wiped her eyes unashamedly, and even Benedick looked suspiciously bright-eyed. Don Pedro stepped forward, his face full of joy and relief. "Welcome back from the dead, Hero Washington. No, Hero Chen now." "Thank you," Hero said, standing with Claudio's help, their hands clasped tight. "Thank you for being willing to see the truth even when it came too late." "Not too late," Leonato said, embracing his daughter with fierce tenderness. "Delayed, but not too late. You're alive, your name is cleared, and you have a husband who will spend his life appreciating what he almost lost." As the group moved toward the reception prepared in Leonato's house, Reverend Francis cleared his throat. "Before we leave the chapel, there's one more matter to address. Benedick Porter and Beatrice Washington. You've been circling each other like planets in orbit for 2 years. Would you like to make that orbit permanent?" Beatrice laughed, surprised. "Are you proposing we get married right now?" "Why not?" Benedick said, grinning. "We're already here. We have witnesses. And I'm tired of waiting for the perfect moment when this moment is perfectly good enough." "That's the most Benedick logic I've ever heard," Beatrice said. "Which is why I love you. Yes, let's do this. Let's get married right now, in this chapel, with our people watching. Are you certain?" Reverend Francis asked. "No preparation, no—" "I've been preparing my whole life for this moment without knowing it," Beatrice said. "I'm certain." They stood before the altar. No veil between them, no pretense or performance. Just two people who'd fought their way to honesty, who'd chosen vulnerability over armor, who'd discovered that love wasn't weakness, but the bravest thing either of them had ever done. "I, Benedick Porter," Benedick said, forgoing the formal vows, "promise to argue with you for the rest of my life, because our arguments make us both smarter. I promise to trust your strength while offering mine. I promise to love you imperfectly, honestly, and with everything I have." "I, Beatrice Washington," Beatrice said, her voice strong and clear, "promise to challenge you, support you, and occasionally let you win an argument when you're actually right. I promise to build a life with you that's bigger than either of us alone. I promise to love you fiercely, freely, and forever. Then I pronounce you married as well." Reverend Francis said with satisfaction. "This has been the most unusual morning of my entire ministry." The celebration that followed at the Washington house was small but joyous. Food appeared, someone had been preparing for this possibility, and music played on the phonograph, and for a few hours the weight of the world lifted. Hero and Claudio couldn't stop touching each other, as if proving reality. Beatrice and Benedick stood close, their arguing transformed into something that looked like dancing. Don Pedro stood on the porch with Leonato, watching the two couples through the window. "We almost destroyed this," he said quietly. "My brother almost succeeded." "But he didn't," Leonato replied. "Truth won. Love won. That matters. Have you heard any news of John?" "The police found him in Tennessee," Leonato said, "trying to cross into Kentucky. He'll face charges for conspiracy for fraud. It won't bring back the days Hero lost, but it's something." Don Pedro nodded slowly. "He's my brother. I'll make sure he has a lawyer, that he's treated fairly, but I can't forgive him yet. Maybe not ever." "That's between you and him," Leonato said, "and between him and God." Inside, Claudio pulled Hero aside for a private moment. "What was it like?" he asked softly. "Being dead to the world?" "Peaceful, in a strange way," Hero admitted. "In Savannah, no one knew me. I could just be, not Hero Washington with a reputation to uphold, not the dean's daughter, just a woman reading books and drinking coffee and waiting. It taught me something about who I am, without all the expectations. And who are you?" "Someone who chooses forgiveness," Hero said. "Someone who believes in second chances. Someone who loves you, Claudio Chen, flaws and all." They kissed again, and this time it tasted like forever. As evening approached and the celebration wound down, the four newly married people stood together on the porch, watching the sunset over Magnolia Grove. The campus had changed in the last week. Innocence lost, hard truths learned, but something gained too. a deeper understanding of trust, of truth, of the work required to build love that lasts. "What happens now?" Hero asked. "After today? After this perfect impossible day?" "We keep fighting," Beatrice said, "for civil rights, for justice, for a world where people like John can't destroy innocence so easily. We keep building." "We keep loving," Benedick added, "which is its own kind of revolution." "We keep trusting," Claudio said, looking at Hero. "Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." "We keep living," Hero concluded, "and we make it count." Below them, students crossed the quad heading to dinner, to study groups, to their futures. The magnolia trees stood sentinel, ancient and patient. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang the hour. And in this small corner of Georgia in 1963, 4 people who traveled through deception to truth, through death to resurrection, through fear to love, stood together and watched the day end, knowing that tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own battles, its own chances for grace. But tonight they had each other. Tonight truth had won, and that for now was enough.